On November 14, 2024, inside the private vault room of New York's Obsidian Club, a silence fell that was louder than a gunshot. The room was filled with the city's elite, hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and old money socialites. In the center stood Sebastian Vance, a man worth $30 billion, and Annie, a waitress earning $15 an hour. Vance thought he was playing a game. He thought he was humiliating a nobody for sport. He asked her one simple question, expecting her to stutter. Instead, her answer didn't just silence the room. It dismantled his empire in exactly 6 words. This is the story of how the Invisible Woman took down the king. The champagne flutes at the Obsidian Club were made of baccarat crystal, costing more individually than Annie's monthly rent in Queens. She held the silver tray with a practiced steadiness, her knuckles white against the metal, navigating the sea of black tuxedos and designer silk gowns. It was the Gala of Giants, an annual event so exclusive that phones were confiscated at the door. The air smelled of expensive cologne, truffle oil, and raw ambition. Annie Ross kept her eyes lowered, focused on the polished mahogany floorboards. In this world, she wasn't a person. She was furniture, a mechanism for delivering alcohol and canapes to the masters of the universe. "More Bollinger! Quickly!" a heavy-set man snapped, waving an empty glass in her face without looking at her. "Right away, sir," Annie murmured. She retreated to the service station, her feet throbbing. She had been on shift for 6 hours. Her manager, a nervous man named Vance, grabbed her arm. "Annie, listen to me," Vance hissed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The VIP section is opening, the vault room. I need you in there." Annie stiffened. "Vance, you know I stick to the main floor. The tips are shared anyway." "Sarah went home sick, and I don't trust the new guy," Vance pleaded. "It's the inner circle tonight. The Vanderbilts, the Rothschild associates, and Sebastian Vance just arrived." The name sent a chill through the kitchen staff. Sebastian Vance, the CEO of Vance Global, the shark of Wall Street. He was a man known for hostile takeovers that left thousands unemployed while his stock portfolio soared. He was ruthless, charming, and notoriously cruel to service staff. There were rumors, dark rumors, about how his first wife had disappeared from the public eye, and how his business partners often ended up bankrupt or in prison. "I can't," Annie said, her voice tight. "Please, Vance." "It's double pay for the hour," Vance countered. "And if you don't go, don't bother coming back for the Christmas shift." Annie closed her eyes. She thought about the stack of medical bills sitting on her kitchen table. Her mother's dialysis treatments weren't covered by insurance anymore. She needed every cent. "Fine," Annie whispered. "I'll do it." She smoothed her black skirt, adjusted her white collar, and picked up a fresh tray of aged Scotch and caviar spoons. She pushed through the heavy velvet curtains into the vault room. The atmosphere in the VIP room was different. It was quieter, sharper. The lighting was dimmer. 12 men and 4 women sat around a massive circular table. They weren't shouting to be heard. They whispered because they knew the world leaned in to listen to them. At the head of the table sat Sebastian Vance. He looked exactly like he did on the cover of Forbes, but colder. He wore a midnight blue bespoke suit, his silver hair swept back perfectly. He was holding court, recounting a story about crushing a rival tech firm in Silicon Valley. "So I told him," Vance chuckled, swirling his drink, "you can keep your integrity or you can keep your house. You can't have both." The table erupted in sycophantic laughter. Annie moved like a ghost, replacing coasters and refilling glasses. She made herself as small as possible. She knew the rule of the service industry: be efficient, be invisible. She reached Vance's side. His glass was half full, but the ice had melted, a subtle violation of his standards. She reached out to swap the glass for a fresh one. "Leave it," Vance said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the laughter instantly. The table went silent. Annie froze, her hand hovering over the table. "I apologize, sir. I thought—" "You thought?" Vance turned in his chair, looking up at her. For the first time, he actually saw her. His eyes were pale blue, predatory, and devoid of warmth. He scanned her face, looking for a flaw, a tremble, a sign of weakness. He enjoyed making people uncomfortable. It was his favorite hobby outside of making money. "I didn't pay $50,000 a plate to have a waitress think for me," Vance said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I paid for excellence." "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance," Annie said, keeping her gaze on the tablecloth. "It won't happen again." She tried to back away, but Vance raised a hand. "Wait." The command was absolute. Annie stopped. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. "Don't look at him," she told herself. "Just survive the interaction." Vance stood up. He was tall, imposing. He walked around the waitress, inspecting her like one might inspect a racehorse or a used car. The other guests watched with amusement. This was the dinner theater. Vance was bored, and he had found a toy. "What is your name?" Vance asked. "Annie, sir." "Annie." He tested the name on his tongue. "You seem tense, Annie. Are we making you nervous?" "No, sir. I just want to do my job well." "Job!" Vance scoffed. He turned to the table. "You see, this is the problem with the modern workforce. No ambition. They are content to carry trays while we carry the world." A few guests chuckled nervously, sensing Vance was escalating. "Tell me, Annie." Vance leaned in close, invading her personal space. She could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir." "You are Mr. Vance." "And do you know what I do?" Annie hesitated. She knew exactly what he did. She knew things about him that would make the people at this table vomit in their $1,000 shoes, but she bit her tongue. "You make business deals, sir?" "Business deals," Vance laughed, clapping his hands. "How quaint. I reshape reality, Annie. I decide who eats and who starves in this city." He walked back to his chair but didn't sit. He picked up a heavy gold lighter from the table and flipped it open and closed. Clink, clink. "I'm going to make you an offer, Annie," Vance announced, addressing the room more than her. "I'm feeling generous tonight. I want to play a little game." Annie's stomach dropped. "I have work to do, sir." "Your manager works for me," Vance cut her off. "Technically, everyone in this building works for me. So, you'll stay." He reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He uncapped a fountain pen. "I am going to ask you one simple question," Vance said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Just one. If you answer it honestly, and I will know if you are lying, I will write you a check right now for $100,000. Gasps rippled around the table. For the guests, that was pocket change. For a waitress, it was life-changing money. It was her mother's medical bills paid for a year. It was freedom. Annie looked up, finally meeting his eyes. "And if I get it wrong?" Vance grinned, showing perfect veneered teeth. "Then you leave, you get fired, and I ensure you never work in a high-end establishment in New York again." The stakes were incredibly high, but entirely uneven. Vance risked nothing. Annie risked her livelihood. "Why?" she asked. "Because I'm bored," Vance shrugged, "and I want to see if a person of your station has any capacity for truth." The room was dead silent. The air conditioning hummed in the background. Every eye was glued to Annie. She took a breath. She looked at the arrogant faces around the table. Then she looked at the checkbook. "Ask your question," Annie said. Vance's smile widened. He loved a gambler. He thought he had her exactly where he wanted her. He thought she was just another desperate soul he could twist into a knot for his evening entertainment. He couldn't have been more wrong. Vance took a slow sip of his drink, savoring the tension. He set the glass down with a sharp clack. "Look around this room, Annie," Vance said, gesturing with a wide sweep of his arm. "We have the finest art on the walls. We have jewelry worth millions on the ladies' wrists. We have bottles of wine that survived World War II. We have the captains of industry." He locked eyes with her. "My question is simple," Vance said softly. "What is the most expensive thing in this room?" The guests began to whisper. One woman touched her diamond necklace. Another man glanced at the original Picasso hanging behind the bar. It was a trick question, surely. Was it the real estate? Was it the collective net worth of the people? Vance watched Annie, waiting for her to stumble, waiting for her to point to the painting or his watch. He was ready to ridicule her shallow understanding of value. Annie didn't look at the painting. She didn't look at the jewelry. She stood perfectly still, her expression shifting from fear to something colder, something harder. She looked Sebastian Vance dead in the eye, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Do you really want me to answer that, Sebastian?" she asked. She didn't call him Sir. She didn't call him Mr. Vance. She used his first name. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was dangerous. The use of his first name hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. The jovial atmosphere of the vault room evaporated instantly. The smiles on the faces of the socialites froze, transforming into masks of confusion and unease. Sebastian Vance didn't blink. For a second, a flicker of genuine shock crossed his face, a crack in the porcelain veneer of his composure, but he plastered it over with a sneer of dismissal. He laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Sebastian?" Vance repeated, looking around the table as if to share the joke. "It seems our waitress has had a bit too much of the fumes from the kitchen." "Security. You asked me a question," Annie interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a strange, resonant authority that overrode his. She took a step closer to the table, her posture shifting. The slump of the subservient worker vanished. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted. She looked like a queen in a pauper's uniform. "You put $100,000 on the table for the truth. Are you withdrawing the offer because you're afraid of the answer?" Vance's hand hovered over the button under the table that would summon his personal security detail. He paused. His ego was his Achilles' heel. If he called security on a petite waitress, he would look weak in front of his peers. He would look like a man who couldn't handle a girl. "I fear nothing," Vance spat, leaning back and crossing his arms. "By all means, entertain us. Tell me, little girl, what is the most expensive thing in this room?" Annie turned away from him, beginning a slow, deliberate circle around the table. The heels of her sensible work shoes clicked rhythmically on the hardwood. "To answer that," Annie said, "we have to define value. You think value is a price tag. You think it's what you can buy at an auction." She stopped behind a heavy-set woman draped in emeralds. Mrs. Beatrice Calloway, the wife of a steel magnate. Beatrice looked nervous, clutching her pearl-handled purse. "Take Mrs. Calloway, for instance," Annie said softly. She gestured to the massive diamond pendant resting on the woman's chest. "The Star of the East, insured for $4 million. Vance smirked. A good guess, but not the most expensive. I know it's not, Annie said, because it's a fake. Mrs. Calloway gasped, her hand flying to her throat. How dare you? The real diamond was sold 3 months ago in Zurich, Annie continued, her voice calm, factual. To pay off a blackmailer who has photos of your husband, Mr. Calloway, entering a hotel room with his 19-year-old intern. You wear the paste replica to keep the stock price of Calloway steel from plummeting due to a scandal. The value of the necklace is 0. The cost of the secret? That's rising every day. The room went deathly silent. Mr. Calloway turned a shade of purple, looking at his wife, who refused to meet his eyes. Annie didn't stop. She moved to the next chair. A young, aggressive hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne sat there. He was known as the Golden Boy of the NASDAQ. And you, Mr. Thorne, Annie said, resting a hand on the back of his chair. He flinched. You're wearing a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. $2.6 million on the secondary market. Damn straight, Thorne said, finding his voice. And it's real. The watch is real, Annie agreed. But the money you bought it with isn't yours. You've been leveraging client funds from the pension accounts to cover your losses on that failed crypto venture in the Bahamas. You're not a millionaire, Marcus. You're a fraud. If the SEC looked at your laptop, the one currently sitting in your coat check bag, you'd be in federal prison by sunrise. Thorne's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the table. Wine bled across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. Vance was no longer smiling. He was sitting up straight, his eyes narrowed into slits. This wasn't a parlor game anymore. This was an execution. Who are you? Vance demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I am the person who refills your glass, Annie said, turning back to face him. I am the furniture. I am the background noise. And do you know what happens when you treat people like furniture, Sebastian? You forget that they have ears. She walked toward the center of the room, standing directly under the crystal chandelier. I have served this room for 6 months, she said, addressing the terrified group. I have heard your whispers. I have heard your phone calls in the hallway when you thought you were alone. I know about the bribes. I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I know about the illicit affairs. She looked at Vance. You asked me what the most expensive thing in this room is, she said. Most people would say it's the painting. She pointed to the original Basquiat on the far wall, valued at $110 million. It is, Vance barked. So take your check and get out. No, Annie shook her head. That painting is an asset. It can be sold. It has value. She reached into her apron pocket. The guests flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a small, battered smartphone. It was an old model, screen cracked, worth maybe $50 at a pawn shop. She placed the cheap phone on the table, right next to Vance's untouched checkbook. This, Annie said, pointing to her phone. This is the most expensive thing in this room. Vance looked at the phone, then up at her. He looked confused, but a creeping dread was starting to settle in his gut. A piece of junk? He scoffed, though his voice wavered. Not the phone, Annie said. What's on it? The silence in the vault room was heavy, suffocating. The air conditioning system hummed, a low drone that felt like a countdown. The spilled wine on the tablecloth was beginning to soak into the wood, staining it permanently. Sebastian Vance stared at the cracked phone. He looked at Annie. For the first time in decades, the billionaire felt the cold, clammy grip of fear. He didn't know what she knew, but he knew that a woman who could dismantle his associates with a few sentences was not bluffing. You're playing a dangerous game, Vance said quietly. You think you can blackmail me? Do you know who I know? I have senators on speed dial. I have police commissioners in my pocket. I know, Annie said. I know exactly who you own. That's why I didn't go to the police. I came to you. What is it? Vance demanded. A recording? A photo? Whatever it is, I can buy it. Name your price. 5 million? 10? The guests looked back and forth between the waitress and the tycoon. They were witnessing a negotiation for survival. Annie smiled, but it was a sad, broken expression. You still don't get it? You think money is the only currency? She tapped the screen of the phone. It lit up. A voice recording app was open. November 14th, 1989, Annie said. The date hung in the air. Vance's face went white. All the blood drained from his complexion, leaving him looking like a wax figure. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You remember that night, don't you, Sebastian? Annie asked softly. You were younger then, just starting to build your empire. You were celebrating your first billion. You were driving your Porsche 911 down Route 9. It was raining. Stop, Vance whispered. It was a plea. You were drunk, Annie continued, her voice hardening. You were doing 90 in a 40 zone. You lost control on the curve near the bridge. You crossed the center line. I said, stop, Vance shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The cutlery jumped. You hit a sedan, Annie said, her voice rising over his. A blue Ford Taurus. Inside was a family, a father, a mother, and a 6-year-old girl. Vance was trembling now. His hands were shaking so hard he had to grip the edge of the table to steady them. You didn't call 911, Annie said. You called your fixer, you called your lawyer, and then you called your driver. She paused, letting the revelation sink in. Arthur Ross, she said. My father. A collective gasp went through the room. The pieces were falling into place. Arthur was a good man, Annie said, tears welling in her eyes but refusing to fall. He was loyal. He needed the job. You told him that if he took the fall, if he said he was driving the Porsche, you would take care of his family forever. You promised him the best lawyers. You promised him a short sentence. Vance stared at her, his eyes wide with horror. He was seeing a ghost. Arthur Ross went to prison for 3 counts of vehicular manslaughter, Annie said. He served 12 years. He died in his cell of a heart attack 2 weeks before his release. I paid him, Vance rasped. I sent checks every month. You stopped the checks 6 months after the trial, Annie screamed, the raw emotion finally breaking through. As soon as the media interest died down, you cut him loose. My mother cleaned houses until her fingers bled to keep us fed. We lost everything. We lived in a car while you bought this place. She swept her arm around the opulent room. So, to answer your question, Annie said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. What is the most expensive thing in this room? She picked up the phone. It's not the art, it's not the jewels, it's this recording. She pressed play. A grainy, static-filled audio filled the silent room. It was unmistakably a younger Sebastian Vance, his voice slurred and panicked. I killed them, Arthur. Oh God, there's blood everywhere. You have to help me. I can't go to jail. I'm Sebastian Vance. You have to take the wheel. I'll pay you. I'll give you $1 million. Just sit in the driver's seat and say it was you. The recording clicked off. Annie looked at the faces around the table. They were looked at Vance with a mixture of horror and distance. They were sharks, and they smelled blood in the water. Vance was finished. My father recorded that conversation on a cassette tape in his pocket, Annie said. He kept it as insurance. He never used it because he was too loyal. He thought you would keep your word. When he died, My mother gave it to me. Vance slumped in his chair. He looked 20 years older than he had 10 minutes ago. Why now? He whispered. Why wait all this time? Because revenge is like a fine wine, Sebastian, Annie said, echoing his earlier sentiment. It needs to age. She tapped the phone again. And here is the twist, she said. You asked what the most expensive thing is. The answer is this recording. Do you know why? Vance shook his head weakly. Because 5 minutes ago, Annie said, before I walked into this room, I set up an automated email. If I don't enter a code into this phone every 30 minutes, the audio file is sent to the New York Times, the FBI, and every major news network in the country. She checked her watch. I have 2 minutes left to enter the code. Vance scrambled up, reaching for his checkbook. I'll give you anything, half my fortune. Just delete it. Annie looked at the checkbook. The $100,000 he had offered earlier seemed like a joke now. I don't want your money, Annie said. I want the one thing you can't buy. What? What do you want? Vance pleaded, sweat dripping down his nose. I want justice, she said. But since the statute of limitations on the accident might be tricky, I'll settle for your total destruction. She looked at the guests. Get out, she told them, unless you want to be named as accessories for withholding evidence. The room erupted into chaos. Billionaires scrambled for the door, knocking over chairs, leaving their coats and their dignity behind. In seconds the room was empty, save for Sebastian Vance and the waitress he had tried to humiliate. You can't do this, Vance wept. I am a pillar of this city. You are a termite, Annie said, and the house is coming down. She looked at her phone. 1 minute left. However, Annie said, a new thought crossing her mind. There is one way out. Vance looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. Anything. Name it. I want a confession, Annie said, not for the accident, but for what you did to the witness. Vance froze. What witness? Annie smiled, and it was the scariest thing Sebastian Vance had ever seen. You didn't think my father was the only one who saw you that night, did you? The chandelier above them seemed to hum with a frantic energy, casting fractured light across Sebastian Vance's sweating face. The room, once a fortress of wealth, had become an interrogation cell. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic ticking of the invisible clock counting down to Vance's social and legal obliteration. Witness? Vance repeated, his voice cracking. He wiped his mouth with a silk handkerchief, his hand trembling so violently that he smeared saliva across his cheek. You're lying. Arthur was alone. I was alone. That was the story. That was the truth. Annie took a step closer, her heels clicking on the floorboards like the gavel of a judge. She looked down at the man who had been a titan of industry just 10 minutes ago. Now he was just a terrified old man in a suit that cost more than a car. You were driving a 2-seater Porsche 911 GT, Annie said, her voice clinical, precise. Arthur found you in the driver's seat, but the passenger door was open, and there were footprints in the mud leading away from the crash site. Women's footprints, high heels, size 6. Vance's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting a ghost to walk through. No, he whispered. She wasn't there. Isabella Molyneux, Annie said. The name hit Vance like a physical blow. He staggered back, his legs hitting the edge of a chair, and he collapsed into it. Isabella Molyneux, the rising star of the modeling world in the late 90s, the face of Vogue. She had vanished from the public eye the same week as the crash. The narrative at the time was that she had gone to rehab in Switzerland, then retired to a quiet life in the French countryside. She was your mistress, Annie continued relentlessly. She was 19 years old. She was in the car with you. She saw you drinking the scotch. She saw the speedometer hit 90. She saw the headlights of the Ford Taurus before you smashed into them. And she saw you climb out of the wreckage, step over the body of a 6-year-old girl, and call your lawyer instead of an ambulance. "She's dead," Vance blurted out. The confession hung in the air. Annie's eyes widened slightly. "Is that what you think?" Vance looked up, his face a mask of confusion and horror. She died. An overdose. In 2001. My team, they handled it. They told me she was gone." "Your team lied to you, Sebastian," Annie said, a cold smile touching her lips. "Or maybe they just took your money and decided not to commit murder for a man who crashes cars into families. Isabella didn't die. She ran." Annie pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron pocket. It wasn't a check. It was a photocopy of a notarized affidavit, dated 3 days prior. "She lives in Ohio now," Annie explained. "She's a grandmother. She goes by the name Susan and works at a bakery. She's been terrified of you for 25 years. She thought you were all-powerful. She thought if she spoke up, you'd finish the job." Annie tossed the paper onto the table in front of him. "But then I found her," Annie said. "I found her, and I told her that Arthur Ross, the man who took the fall for you, had a daughter. I told her that I was going to bring you down, with or without her. She cried for 3 hours, Sebastian, and then she wrote this." Vance stared at the paper. He didn't need to read it to know what it said. It was the nail in his coffin. "The statute of limitations on the manslaughter might be complicated," Annie said, circling the table again. "But conspiracy? Witness tampering? Solicitation of murder? There is no statute of limitations for what you tried to do to her. You paid a cleaner to silence a witness. That's a federal crime. That puts you in a supermax prison, Sebastian. Not a country club. A cage." Vance grabbed the paper and ripped it in half. Then he ripped it again, shredding it into confetti. "It's a copy," he screamed, throwing the pieces at her. "It's just paper. You have nothing. Hearsay, the ravings of a washed-up junkie and a disgruntled waitress." "Is it?" Annie asked calmly. She picked up her phone again. The screen still glowed. "You really don't understand how technology works, do you?" Annie asked. "You're stuck in 1999. You think ripping up a paper destroys the evidence. You think intimidation works." "I have billions!" Vance roared, standing up, his face purple with rage. He looked deranged now, the facade completely gone. "I can buy the judge. I can buy the jury. I will bury you in litigation, so deep you won't see the sun until you're 80. Who are you to challenge me? I am Sebastian Vance." "You are a criminal," Annie said, "and you are out of time." She turned the phone screen toward him. "The timer," she said. It wasn't counting down to send an email. Vance squinted at the screen. It wasn't an email client. It was a video interface. The little red dot in the corner was blinking. "Leave." "I'm live streaming, Sebastian," Annie said softly. The realization hit Sebastian Vance slowly, like a poison spreading through his veins. He looked at the phone. He looked at the red dot. He looked at the numbers in the corner of the screen. Viewers, 412,058. "What?" Vance choked out. "What is that?" "It's a platform called Twitch," Annie explained, her voice devoid of sympathy. "My boyfriend sets up gaming streams. He helped me rig a hidden camera in my uniform button, and this phone is acting as the relay. But for the last 10 minutes, since I put the phone on the table, the camera has been facing you." Vance froze. He looked at the phone lens, the black eye of the internet. "You're live," Annie said. 400,000 people just watched you confess to vehicular manslaughter. They watched you admit to paying off my father. They watched you admit that you thought you had Isabella Molyneux killed. No, Vance whispered. No, no, no. And they saw you rip up the affidavit, Annie added. Which, by the way, the internet loves. Destroying evidence on camera? The prosecutors are going to frame that screenshot. Vance lunged across the table. It was a desperate, animalistic move. He swiped at the phone, knocking it to the floor. The screen cracked further, but the audio kept running. "Turn it off!" Vance screamed, scrambling on his hands and knees to grab the device. "Turn it off. It's too late," Annie said, stepping back. "The stream is being recorded by thousands of people. It's already on Twitter. It's on Reddit. It's everywhere. You can smash the phone, Sebastian. You can burn this building down. You can't delete what the world just saw." Vance knelt on the floor, clutching the broken phone. He looked up at Annie, tears streaming down his face. The arrogance was gone. The power was gone. He was just a man who had run out of road. "Why?" he sobbed. "I offered you money. I would have given you millions. Why do this? Why ruin everything?" "Because you stole my father," Annie said, her voice shaking for the first time. "You didn't just take him away for 12 years. You took his dignity. You let him die in a cage thinking he was a criminal, while you drank champagne in rooms like this. Money doesn't fix that, Sebastian. The truth fixes that." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the vault room burst open. It wasn't the police. Not yet. It was Vian, the manager, looking pale and terrified. Behind him was Vance's personal assistant, a young man named Greg who was glued to his tablet, looking like he was about to vomit. "Mr. Vance!" Greg shouted, running into the room. "Sir, you need to— Oh my God!" "What is it?" Vance asked, trying to stand up, smoothing his suit, trying to regain a shred of dignity. "Handle this, Greg. Get security. Get the legal team on the phone." "Sir, the legal team is resigning," Greg stammered. "I just got an email from the firm. They're dropping you. They're citing a conflict of interest. But, sir, it's the stock." "What about the stock?" Vance snapped. "Vance Global," Greg said, turning the tablet around so Vance could see. "It's crashing. The algorithm picked up the live stream sentiment. The board has called an emergency meeting. They're moving to vote you out as CEO immediately." "They can't do that!" Vance yelled. "I am the company." "Not anymore," Annie said from the corner of the room. Vance spun around to face her. You little— "Mr. Vance, please," Vian interrupted, stepping between them. "There are reporters outside, hundreds of them. They're surrounding the building. CNN is live from the sidewalk. They're asking about the Ross confession." The Ross confession. It already had a name. Vance looked around the room, the empty chairs where his friends had sat, the spilled wine, the cracked phone on the floor. He looked at Annie one last time. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to destroy her. But as he looked into her eyes that looked so much like Arthur Ross's, he realized that he had created this. He had built this trap himself, brick by brick, lie by lie, over 25 years. "I have a helicopter on the roof," Vance muttered, a plan forming in his panicked mind. "I can go to the Hamptons. I can take the jet to Belize. Non-extradition." He turned to Greg. "Get the pilot ready, now!" "Sir," Greg backed away. "The pilot isn't answering, and I think those are sirens." From the street below, the sound began. A low wail, rising in pitch and intensity. One siren, then two, then a chorus. The NYPD. Annie walked over to the table and picked up her serving tray. She placed the empty glasses on it, her movements calm and methodical. "You asked for a simple answer, Sebastian," Annie said. "You wanted to know the value of things." She walked to the door, pausing just before she left the vault room forever. "The checkbook is still on the table," she said. "You're going to need it for your bail, if they grant it." She pushed the doors open. The noise from the main restaurant flooded in, the sound of panic, of guests gossiping, of the world reacting to the fall of a giant. Annie stepped out, leaving Sebastian Vance alone in the center of his golden cage, listening to the sirens come for him. The Obsidian Club, usually a sanctuary of hushed tones and polite society, had descended into anarchy. The NYPD had cordoned off the main entrance, blue and red strobe lights reflecting off the gold-leafed pillars. A swarm of paparazzi, tipped off by the viral live stream, pressed against the barricades like a tidal wave. They weren't there for the celebrities tonight. They were there for the monster. Annie stood by the service exit in the alleyway. The cold November wind bit at her cheeks, but she didn't feel it. She felt a strange, weightless sensation. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, but also a profound sense of peace. She watched as the side doors opened. 2 federal agents, grim-faced and efficient, marched Sebastian Vance out. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His tie was undone. His wrists, usually adorned with platinum and diamonds, were bound in steel handcuffs. He looked small, without his entourage, without his checkbook, without the fear he instilled in others. He was just an elderly man shuffling toward a patrol car. Cameras flashed blindly, a lightning storm of scrutiny. Reporters shouted questions that merged into a wall of noise. "Mr. Vance, did you bribe the jury? Is it true about Arthur Ross? Do you have a statement for the victim's family?" Vance kept his head down. He looked defeated, a man waking up from a long dream of invincibility to find reality waiting with a sledgehammer. As the agents pushed his head down to guide him into the back of the cruiser, he looked up one last time. His eyes scanned the crowd, panicked and searching. For a brief second, through the chaos, he locked eyes with Annie standing in the shadows of the alley. He didn't glare. He didn't scream. He just looked hollow. He realized, finally, that the simple waitress had been the executioner he never saw coming. The car door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The siren wailed and the convoy sped away, taking the billionaire to central booking, where he would be processed just like everyone else. Fingerprinted, photographed, stripped of his identity. Annie turned away. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her manager, Vance. She ignored it. It buzzed again. An unknown number, probably a reporter. She ignored it. Then a text came through from an unsaved number. "I saw the stream. I'm crying. You did it, Ellie. You actually did it." "Mum." Annie let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 12 years. She leaned against the brick wall of the alley and slid down until she was sitting on the pavement, amongst the trash cans and the discarded crates. And there, in the filth of the alleyway, the woman who had just toppled a titan buried her face in her knees and wept. Not tears of sadness, but tears of release. The ghost of Arthur Ross could finally rest. The next morning, the headlines were unanimous. The fall of Vance. Billionaire confesses on live stream. Justice for Arthur Ross. The legal system, usually slow and clunky, moved with lightning speed when the evidence was broadcast to 500,000 people. The reopened investigation found the payoffs to the cleaner in Vance's encrypted ledgers. They found Isabella Molyneux's testimony. They found the undeniable proof of a 25-year cover-up. Vance's assets were frozen. His board of directors fired him before he even made bail. The vault room at the Obsidian Club was permanently closed, labeled a crime scene. But the most important legal document came 3 weeks later. A judge signed an order of posthumous exoneration for Arthur Ross. The conviction was vacated. His record was scrubbed clean. He was no longer a felon in the eyes of the law. He was an innocent man who had been used. 1 year later, the iron gates of St. Michael's Cemetery in Queens groaned as Annie pushed them open. It was a crisp, biting morning in late November, almost exactly a year to the day since the night at the Obsidian Club. The sky was a piercing, cloudless blue, the kind of clarity that hurts the eyes if you look up for too long. Annie walked along the gravel path, her boots crunching rhythmically against the loose stones. The wind stripped the last of the copper and gold leaves from the oak trees, scattering them across the rows of grey headstones like confetti from a parade that had passed long ago. She wasn't the same woman who had trembled in the service corridor of the Obsidian Club, terrified of spilling champagne. She walked differently now. Her stride was longer, her shoulders set back. She wore a tailored wool coat, simple but high quality, and a scarf that had been a birthday gift from her mother. She didn't look like a waitress. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. She carried a bouquet of white lilies wrapped in brown paper. They were her father's favorite. He used to say they were the only flower that didn't try too hard to be beautiful. They just were. She stopped at plot 412. The headstone was modest, weathered by a decade of rain and neglect, but the grass around it was now manicured perfectly. Arthur Ross, beloved father and husband. 1965, 2011. Annie knelt on the cold ground, not caring about the dirt on her coat. She placed the flowers against the granite and rested her hand on the cold stone. It felt solid, permanent. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. Her breath plumed in the cold air. "I brought you something." She reached into her bag. It wasn't a check, and it wasn't a legal summons. It was a thick, heavy envelope. She opened it and pulled out the contents, laying them on the grass next to the flowers. The first was a newspaper clipping from the New York Times. The headline was bold and black. "Vance sentenced, 25 years without parole." It had been the trial of the century. Annie remembered sitting in the back of the courtroom 3 months ago. She remembered the smell of the polished wood benches and the murmuring of the press. She remembered seeing Sebastian Vance. He had looked terrifyingly small. The titan of Wall Street, the man who had treated the world as his personal chessboard, had withered. Without his tailored suits, without his hair dye, without the fear of his subordinates to prop him up, he was just a frail, angry old man. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, including conspiracy, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice, Vance hadn't screamed. He hadn't raged. He had simply slumped forward, his forehead touching the defense table, as if his strings had been cut. The simple question he had asked her that night had echoed in every headline. What is the most expensive thing in the room? The answer, it turned out, was his freedom. It had cost him everything. "He's gone, Dad," Annie told the gravestone. "He's in a facility in upstate New York. He'll never hurt anyone again." The judge made sure of it. He called Vance's actions a cancerous abuse of power. She traced the date of her father's death on the stone. "And they cleared your name," she added, her voice catching in her throat. She pulled out the second document. It was a certificate of posthumous exoneration, stamped with the official seal of the state of New York. It stated, in clear, legal language, that Arthur Ross was innocent of the charges of vehicular manslaughter. It acknowledged that he had been coerced. It gave him back his dignity. "Mom framed the original," Annie smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "She put it right over the fireplace. She sings in the kitchen again, Dad. I haven't heard her sing in 12 years, but she's singing again." The money had come, too. Not the hush money Vance had offered, but legitimate restitution. The courts had liquidated Vance's assets to pay the victims. The vault room settlement had been massive. It was enough to pay off the medical bills instantly. It was enough to buy their small apartment outright. It was enough to ensure that her mother would never have to scrub another floor or worry about the cost of dialysis again. But Annie hadn't kept the rest for herself. She didn't buy a Porsche. She didn't buy diamonds. She remembered the lesson of the Obsidian Club too well. Excess blinds you. Instead, she had invested in a different kind of power. She pulled out the third and final item from her bag. It was a student ID card. Annie Ross, Columbia Law School, class of 2027. "I'm doing it," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm studying criminal defense. It's hard. I'm up until 3 a.m. most nights reading case law about torts and evidentiary standards. But I love it." She looked around the quiet cemetery, seeing the rows of graves, thinking about how many of these people might have had stories like her father's. Stories that were buried because they didn't have the money or the voice to fight back. "I'm not going to be a corporate lawyer," she promised him. "I'm not going to sit in high-rise offices drinking scotch. I'm going to be the person standing between the monsters and the people they try to crush. I'm going to be the voice you didn't have." A gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the dry leaves. It felt like a hand brushing against her shoulder. She sat there for a long time, just listening to the silence. For years, her life had been defined by noise. The shouting of creditors, the beeping of hospital machines, the orders of demanding customers, the internal screaming of injustice. Now, finally, there was quiet. She thought about the Obsidian Club. It was gone now. After the scandal, the brand became toxic. The investors pulled out. The building was sold to a developer who was turning it into a public library and community center. The irony wasn't lost on her. The place that had been a fortress of exclusion was becoming a place open to everyone. The vault room, where Vance had held court, would soon be the children's reading section. Annie stood up, her knees stiff from the cold ground. She brushed the dirt from her coat and looked down at the grave one last time. "I have to go, Dad. I have a torts exam on Monday, and Mum is making a roast for dinner. But I'll be back soon." She buttoned her coat. "I love you," she whispered. "Rest now. The shift is over." She turned and walked back toward the gates. As she reached her car, a reliable used sedan she had bought with her own money, she paused. Across the street, a black limousine was idling at the curb. For a split second, her heart hammered. A flashback. But then the window rolled down. It wasn't Vance. It wasn't an agent. It was just a driver, waiting for a grieving family emerging from the chapel. Annie let out a breath and unlocked her car. She looked at her reflection in the side mirror. She didn't see the invisible waitress anymore. She saw a woman who knew the true price of things. Sebastian Vance had asked her what the most expensive thing in the room was. He thought it was about money. He thought it was about objects. Annie started the engine, the heater humming to life. The most expensive thing in the world wasn't a diamond or a painting or a billion-dollar company. The most expensive thing was the truth. It cost everything to keep it hidden, and it cost everything to bring it to light. But unlike Vance's empire, the truth was the only thing that lasted. She put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic of the living, leaving the ghosts behind her. She had work to do. And that is the incredible story of Annie Ross and Sebastian Vance. It's a powerful reminder that while money can buy mansions, lawyers, and silence, it can never buy the truth. Vance thought he was invincible because of his bank account, But he forgot the most important lesson of all. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one listening. Annie proved that integrity is the only currency that doesn't depreciate. What would you have done if you were in Annie's shoes? Would you have taken the $100,000 and walked away, or would you have risked it all for justice? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and courage, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.